Today, I just want to take a few moments to tell you a bit more about Mr. Big stings that come up fairly often in the cases that I cover. I know that many of you are listening outside of Canada and are intrigued by this particular police tactic that we use here. And to save time in my production of the video, you can look at pictures of my cats. The orange one is Bailey and the gray one is Oliver. Normally, these videos take a fair bit of time because I need to be mindful of paying proper respect and tribute to the victims and their families. But today, cats. So the Mr. Big stings were actually first started by the RCMP, which is kind of like our FBI. In 1965, it was an idea cooked up to get a confession out of a former Vancouver police constable, David Harrison, who they suspected had stolen $1.2 million in canceled currency. And since then, they have been used probably 500 times in cases where police haven't been able to get the evidence that they need to convict and really need a confession, but obviously they already have a very strong suspect. They are extremely expensive, very intricate, and can put the undercover operators' lives in danger. So they are normally only used these days for murder convictions. So what they do is they first put the person under surveillance and try to get an idea of their patterns, like their likes and dislikes, what they do on a daily basis. And this can actually go on for weeks because they need to come up with a coincidental meeting with this undercover operator that's actually going to work. Riding up on my doorstep with a story about a flat tire probably isn't going to work on me, but maybe a new neighbor moves in and befriends me with similar interests. That might work a little bit better. They assess that kind of thing. And when they befriend the person, they are normally pretty generous and kind of whining and dining them. They'll get talking about easy ways that maybe the person can make a little bit of extra money. They may make a little delivery here and there, count some cash for them, that kind of thing. And they draw them in with gifts and promises of a lavish lifestyle, something that someone who's already hiding something would probably really like. And if they don't suspect that the person is normally involved in criminal activity and just say murdered their wife as their first and only crime, then they have to do a little bit more work to befriend the person and make them a trusted confidant. And once they're drawn in, they have to find a way to get them talking about what the person is suspected of doing. So maybe they'll say something like, "Hey, we heard you were a suspect in such and such. Did you do it? Because, if you're going to work for us, we need to know everything." Or they'll tell a story about how this friend of theirs helped them get out of charges on something. Whatever it is that they need to get the person to feel that they are trusted to keep their secrets and help them get away with whatever it was that they did. Or maybe it's a threat that if they left evidence behind and get themselves arrested, Mr. Big, who of course normally goes by a different name, we're not just going around calling people Mr. Big, isn't going to be happy about it. Every scenario is different, and the undercover operators deeply embed themselves in their new lives, changing their appearance, their behavior. I talked to one detective that used to work undercover, and he said that he came out of his house one day after his operation was over, like all cleaned up, no more shaggy beard or rough looking appearance. And his neighbors thought that the weird, creepy guy next door had moved out and been replaced. Oh, Ollie, he's so cute. But they are controversial because what if you didn't actually do anything and you just really want to be part of this organization? You might confess to either look tough or just give them what they want to hear. Or if you have some cognitive function issues and aren't neurotypical in intelligence, then you can be roped into something that you just don't really understand, which is why they aren't used in the US and are kind of considered coercion. But they continue to be used here after a case known as R.V. Hart, which involved a man named Nelson Hart who was suspected of killing his 2-year-old twin daughters by drowning them in Little Harbor in Newfoundland in August of 2002. Now, he claimed that he had taken the girls, Krista and Karen, to Little Harbor where there's like a wharf or like a dock, and Krista had fallen off that dock, and Nelson, who he could not swim, he panicked and then left to go get help and left Karen there. And he also said that what had sort of sparked all this was that he had had a seizure. And when he had seizures, the girls found them very scary, which they would. They were only 2 years old. And so they tended to run away from him. So he drove home, returned with his wife. Krista was found. She was still alive, but she died later in hospital, and Karen was pronounced dead at the scene. That Mr. Big operation started in October of 2002, and when they were initially surveilling him, they found that he was extremely socially isolated. Like he had no friends. Everywhere he went, it was with his wife. He was also on social assistance and he only had a grade 4 education and, of course, had this history of seizures. So they initially made contact with him. He was basically given money as a favor for assisting in finding this guy's sister, which of course they made easy for him to do. Then he was asked to make some truck deliveries. It was really more that this friendship had sort of developed, and he started to deal with some fake credit cards, forged passports. There was counterfeit casino chips. He was basically made to believe that this organization was all across the country. Like, we had a ton of payoffs, so he started to make quite a bit of money, and him and his wife were given these really luxurious trips across the country. They went on shopping sprees, they had these expensive dinners, and so Nelson started to really want to aspire to become a full-time member of this organization. And in the late spring of 2003, they introduced him then to this Mr. Big, who of course went by a different name, and he told him that, "We understand that you were kind of suspected in the death of your daughters, and we sort of want to know everything." And he wouldn't accept the seizures as what had happened. And so, under quite a bit of pressure, he confessed to that he pushed the girls off of this dock. He did bring the operators down to that wharf to sort of reenact the drownings, and there was some inconsistencies in how he said it happened. So in March 2007, a jury convicted him of 2 counts of first-degree murder for that. Oh, little Bailey. And now he appealed on the grounds that, and I'm just going to read this from the court documents, it was not reasonable to expect that he would have any reason or take any opportunity to leave the organization. That meant he had to subscribe to the culture of the organization and to ensure that he continued to receive the approbation of Mr. Big. Although he obviously wanted to maintain that he had an innocent explanation for the deaths of his daughters, he eventually succumbed when it became clear that Mr. Big would accept no other answer than one which accepted his proposition that he was responsible for their murder. For Mr. Hart, in the circumstances in which he found himself, there was very little downside to telling Mr. Big what he wanted to hear, since he believed the operatives were not police and had been assured that any information he gave them would be kept from the authorities. On the other hand, in his mind, Mr. Hart had a great deal to lose if he did not accede to the acquired admission. And so that appeal was actually allowed, and the Supreme Court decided that going forward, all Mr. Bigstings were inadmissible evidence in court, unless the operatives could prove that the value of the evidence that they obtained outweighed the prejudicial effect. Like, say, if he's willing to be in a criminal organization, then he must be a criminal and therefore must have murdered the person. And what that means is that it can't be just a confession. They also have to have obtained from the person evidence that supports their confession that only the perpetrator would know. So Mr. Big Stings now involve holdback evidence, so that is certain information that's not released to the media or anyone else. Often it's things like they'll say, "You need to take me to the body," and that's why they are still used, just with a little added tweaking. And fortunately, murderers aren't the ones watching or listening to much true crime around these parts because they work most of the time. In fact, 75% of the time, according to the RCMP, and in both directions, they can work to clear a suspect as well. And if it does go to court and is admissible, they have a 95% conviction rate. And that's just a little bit of background on Mr. Big Stings for you. And just look at that face.